All right. All right. Thanks, guys, for coming in here today to try this out. Um, I wanted to see if we could do our myth streams in a more live setting, um, so that we could put more of them out, basically, and we could get through kind of a checklist of things that I personally would love to talk about with you guys. Um, and so it's going to be a little different than some of my other content. When I first started the channel, my goal was to put out a series of like 10 to 15-minute videos going through all the deities, so that there would be a place where you could just go to as a resource and watch a playlist of really short clips, and it would lay out everything um, in a crystal clear fashion, or at least give kind of the bare outline. That was kind of my original goal, was just to have videos that would be bare outlines, and kind of uh, you know reference points that people could use to investigate for themselves based on those 10 to 15-minute videos, rather than being videos where I thoroughly explore everything and really prove and argue the cases of each thing, because it was basically the idea was to summarize what I'd already argued extensively in articles and in my book. Um, but of course, as I as I continued going, there is a lot that needs to, people who haven't read the articles then are arguing back and wanting further explanations, and then further new information, new discoveries keep coming up, new things that I want to discuss. And so videos have gotten longer and longer. Um, the point is, with these live streams, if this works out today, these will be kind of a separate concept to the original idea for this channel, which was to have a lot of self-contained, concise, at least very straightforward uh, videos about individual discoveries or individual deities and comparisons. And this live stream will be more of a free form and very informal way to approach the material instead. So kind of, and I want to have it kind of in the live portion of the channel so that it has that differentiation for people. And so on my Patreon, I have put out with basically Arno has really put together the chart of all of the parallels, the main parallels, not all of the parallels, but the main Indo-European parallels for the main gods across numerous of the branches. So, for example, this is the first section of the chart that we have out on our Patreon, and it goes through. I'm forgetting the exact number, but Arno, do you know how many deities there are on the chart? Is it like 20?
I did not count them, no. But
Yeah. So it's a large chart that we have out. So if anyone is interested in that, that is what this sort of live stream concept is based around. I was hoping that we could go through one row of the chart each time we have a chance to do one of these live streams, and we can kind of just explore the individual parallels in brief, as kind of briefly but also loosely as we can over the next hour or so, hour and a half that we have. So with that, I don't want to waste too much more time, but today we're going to start with the Prajapati type god, which it's a good place to start because Prajapati is the father of the gods in the Vedic pantheon. He is the progenitor of the gods. He is symbolically the totality of the gods as well, and the totality of um, the cosmos. He in Vedic material, he's identified symbolically with the concept of totality, you might say. Um, and so in that sense, he is a manifestation of the all, or even a manifestation in the world of the absolute. And that's a complicated issue because Rudra, which is sort of his the polar opposed deity from Prajapati, is also a manifestation of the absolute. And so it's very even saying that is kind of you're already getting confused with how these things map symbolically and with language. But nonetheless, Prajapati is another name of Brahma, and Brahma, of course, is a sort of form of the same name as Brahman, the absolute. And Brahma is like the manifestation of the Brahman in some capacity, that a mystical capacity, like I was saying. So because of that, Prajapati slash Brahman is also called that one, and is the focal point of the most famous Rig Vedic creation hymn, which is, I believe, Rig Veda 10.129. Is that, am I correct on that? But anyways, it's the Nasadiya Sukta. And in this, what people usually just call the creation myth, it says that one emerges from the dark and signless waters. And that one emits the primal seed in that moment, which is desire, which is kama. And so, yeah, so you can see that the other name of that one who emerges from the water, it's very explicit in the tradition, in the Rig Veda even, that this is aka Hiranyagarbha, which Hiranyagarbha means golden embryo or egg, golden embryo, essentially. And that is the embryo of the golden cosmic egg, essentially. So Prajapati is like the totality of the golden embryo of the egg. And in a sense, because he's the totality, he is the whole egg and the embryo, but that gets into more complications because specifically he is the essence, he is the golden embryo, not just the shell. The shell, as we see in other when it's really broken down in Vedic sources as well as Orphic sources, that the shell is always identified with either earth or sky earth, the sky being the top and earth being the bottom, or the whole thing is earthen material that becomes sky and earth, things like that. So this is the story of the golden egg with the golden embryo, the cosmic egg, emerging out of the dark waters. That's the creation myth, and that is the myth of Prajapati. And so that kind of gives the idea of what Prajapati basically is. He is consistently the totality symbolically, but also the axis mundi, and that's important because he also he has identifications with the cosmic tree itself, such as the cosmic tree growing out of his head, and things like that. So the cosmic tree is called the tree of Brahma in another passage that I've cited. So once he kind of is born into the world from the dark waters, he is that center point. He is the axis mundi, and this is important because you now have this very strong image that I think becomes important to the parallels, which is this deity emerging upward out of primordial dark waters as a sort of, it's not just like vaguely crawling out of an ocean or onto the shore or something. It's out of a center point, and he is the center point. So I think that's important. He is the center point in totality. And he's not falling down. He's not dripping down out of waters like Ymir does. Or actually, it's a little vague, the directionality of how Ymir manifests. But because when you realize this same symbolic image and even creation myth overall, it's the exact same thing that is happening in the myth of the Egyptian Atum, who he emerges out of the primordial waters as the totality and father of all the gods, as the embodiment of the one. And it's much more emphasized, or it's maybe equally emphasized, I guess you could say, that he is the primordial mound. And that primordial mound is the axis mundi, very emphatically in the Egyptian tradition. So it is the axis mundi. He is the axis mundi, the Ben mound that emerges out of the inert waters of the noon. And that, again, the inert waters, that suggests these waters, they are motionless and dark. It would make sense that they are also cold and without light or fire. I think it just logically makes sense, or at least that's one direction you could go. And that kind of links back to, that's kind of where things kind of became clear with what is actually happening with Buri. Because Ymir, like I said, he is formed in kind of a different fashion. He doesn't emerge up out of a large body of waters. He is like melted from some frozen flows and poison and things like that. But Buri of the Norse is specifically emerging up out his head, the image of the head popping up out of the ice that Audhumbla licks. And in the Egyptian case, it is the waves of the noon that reveal the Ben mound, kind of like the licking motion of Audhumbla, which I also connected in my mind. But it is very much, Buri is like emerging upward out of the inert frozen waters in that case, which are then akin to the dark waters, the inert waters of other branches. And so that's kind of where that parallel became imagistically really strong for me, is that Buri is much more repeating this paradigm of emerging his head upward like the Ben mound, like a center point out of inert waters. Can anyone else add anything to that about who is Prajapati? Anything you want to add, or anything about Buri and that parallel?
Yeah, well, I just think it's that was something that was very eye-opening for me. That in case people didn't catch it, the inert waters being the same as the rime or frost or ice that Buri emerges from. It's like all it takes is like middle school science class to learn that ice is just water that's not moving at all, which is a pretty profound symbol then for what the Vedas describe as inert waters. I think it's pretty clever.
Or the inert waters is more the Egyptian framing, because that's what the noon is. Yeah, sorry.
But I mean, well, regardless, so to the Egyptian then. But yeah, so that made a lot of sense to me. So just in case it didn't pop out to people, I just wanted to clarify that at least. I mean, yeah, everybody thinks of Odin as the All-Father and the father of all the Aesir, but obviously his oldest ancestor would also be the ultimate paternal ancestor of all the gods as well. And yeah, it's pretty clear the one who emerges from the waters and is the origin of all the gods, especially emerging from inert waters or ice. That's pretty clear for me.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing, the thing that I find interesting is a lot of times people who are stuck on the Yimo and Manas creation myth, they will have to completely ignore willfully Buri entirely. Like, it doesn't fit with the concept at all, that Buri is even there. So they have to, because Ymir and Odin are supposed to be the primordial things entirely with no origin, in that concept. And so they're having to pretend and ignore these crucial elements of the Norse mythology that are the foundation there, and act like, well, maybe this is some corruption. They just added, they thought Odin needed some parents and a grandparent for some reason, or this is some other variant creation myth, or I don't know. Obviously they work it somehow, so that, I don't know. That at least is what I've seen, that they have no explanation at very least, that really is satisfying. But when you look at the Vedic and when you look at it from this angle, everything pretty much falls into place, because the other thing is Prajapati has as either his son or grandson, in different variants, Rudra. And Rudra then, of course, attacks Father Sky while he, and divides him from his sexual act with his female other half, and the seed falls into earth, blah blah blah, in Rig Veda 10.61 and 1.71. And so the point is, Rudra's father or grandfather in different variants is Prajapati. So that is the foundation of the Vedic genealogy of the gods, and of the, it seems like most people are on board with the clear parallel between Rudra and Odin, but very few people will just look at what is the genealogy, what is the birth of Rudra, and how does that map onto other branches. And it's right there. It's the same thing, especially once you realize that Prajapati Hiranyagarbha emerges up out of the dark waters, essentially, as an axis mundi, and that's exactly what you have with Buri. The other thing with that is that Prajapati, there are multiple variants of how Prajapati fathers Rudra, or fathers his children in general. And it is essentially in the commentaries and interpretations of what this myth symbolizes, Prajapati is copulating with sometimes his daughter, or other times, in another variant, his first sons, which are just sun and moon and wind and fire, I think. Yeah, sun, moon, wind, and fire are his first four sons in another variant, and those four sons see the female, the daughter, the goddess, whatever, and they emit their seed into a golden bowl, which Prajapati then gathers together like a womb unto himself, and holds it and incubates it like it's his womb. So the concept is that this is the God who is really the totality. If he's the totality, then these sons are extensions of himself anyways, but also the female aspect that is causing him to procreate, causing his sons or himself to emit the primordial seed. Even that female aspect is really part of the totality, is really part of himself, in that primordial moment. So therefore, the primordial moment, which, and again, in Rigveda 10.129, the Nasadiya Sukta, there is no goddess outside of himself. He simply emits the primordial seed, which is Kama. And it says it right there. It says, that one emerged from the waters, and he shed Kama, the primordial seed. So the point is, it's really him by himself emitting the seed, as in Rigveda 10.129. But these other variations show in a dramatic myth, in a more dramatized myth, the female aspect that is actually within the totality of himself, being the catalyst, the trigger for this outburst of procreation, which leads ultimately to the gods and to Rudra. So what you have with Buri is he has no known consort, and I think you can you confirm that that's correct? Because that's how I have understood that. Can anyone here confirm that? I believe he has no known consort, Buri, and his son. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
you
he
have.
doesn't. He's not said
Yeah,
to
his.
have. But
Yeah.
the meaning of so buri is like not burden bearer, but it means like bearer, as in, and then and bur, his son, his name translates to offspring. So it's kind of similar. You have the intermediate step of like desire or seed in between
Yes.
the godhead and Rudra type.
Exactly. Exactly. And bearer. So Buri is the bearer. Prajapati means um, lord of generation, essentially, meaning lord of procreation, like the ultimate father. The lord of generation, matching the bearer of all the children, essentially, bearer of the gods. That makes sense to me as a parallel. But yeah, and then in this all ties back around, because in the Egyptian myth of Atum, who we talked about emerging from the waters, he you know auto generates the primordial seed. It's just himself, and he emits the seed, which becomes Shu and Tefnut, and there are variations on that, um, including saliva instead of he spits or sneezes or whatever, instead of seed. But it is this concept. Buri is right there. He has no female consort in that myth, just like Atum, exactly like Atum has no female consort. He simply is the totality, and he is spurred from within or whatever, to emit the primordial seed. That seed is his own overflow of passion, which then becomes the god who divides sky and earth, which is what happens with Shu. So Atum emits the seed all by himself. The seed develops into Shu and Tefnut, male and female aspects of one divine concept, essentially. But Shu is the one who then divides Geb and Nut, the earth and sky. So Shu is the divider of earth and sky, and that's his next move, essentially. And that is exactly what Odin does. And so you have every kind of piece falling together in that sense. And let's see, there's not that much else about Buri, except that I think it is interesting that Bestla is the female who becomes the wife of Bor, the son, or Bur, the son of Buri. So Bestla apparently means something like bast, or relating to the bark of a tree or something like that. Is that what's your take on Bestla?
Yeah, so Bestla is, I mean, it's cognate with the word bast. It's equivalent with a feminine suffix, and the bast is the inner bark of a tree, not necessarily the outer
Ah,
bark. I don't
mhm.
necessarily know what that could mean, but if it's, you know, if this intermediary step between the Prajapati type and Rudra type is the desire or seed of the Prajapati type, and then the desires, deified desires consort is being related to a tree. I can't say for sure what exactly it means or why,
Mhm.
but it's at the same time it seemingly pretty continuous with the whole sacred tree
Yeah.
symbolism, which could
Yeah,
come be like.
it is hard to know, but yeah, exactly. If Buri himself is connected to either he is the god of the sacred tree, or the sacred tree grows out of him as he's sort of like the mound from which it grows, or whatever. He's connected to it intimately. Sometimes, as in the Egyptian mythology, it's the female aspect who is the tree itself, while Atum is like the mound. But they're aligned concepts. So potentially Besla would be like part of the tree, which is helping to um, carry along the passionate outburst, which is Bor, and foster the divine principle forward to result ultimately in Odin. So as, for example, Prajapati brings the seed back into himself in the golden bowl. That could be something like the female aspect of that is Bestla. Who knows, how exactly that was mapped. But it's interesting. You have here apparently a goddess of the tree. And so that goddess of the tree most likely is just continuous part of Buri, esoterically, conceptually. And so Bolthorn, is it Balethorn or Bolthorn, her father, I would think is just, emerging as an aspect of Buri, because Buri is the starting point. At least you can make that conceptual mapping and argue that. And then that can, the Celtic case follows that line of thinking. Basically, Bila, the figure Bila, has been recognized as the pretty obvious god of the sacred tree, because Bila means the sacred tree. It means something like leaf, but it is the word used for sacred trees in Celtic languages, in Irish language rather. And so you have the story of Bila, and he has a certain number of brothers, something like 9, 10 brothers. It changes in different tellings, even within the same sort of narrative of the Book of Invasions, that they list the number of brothers differently a couple times. But anyways, let's say there are about 10 brothers here, and one of them is Bile, from whom the main line of what are pretty obviously gods arises from Bile. So that already is interesting, including Eivor Finn, who we have mapped Finn to Odin, is the grandson of Bile, just as Odin is the grandson of Buri. So you can see it starts to be very coincidental. But Bile has 10 brothers, and one of them is Merhevnia, or Merthevnia, and that means the obscure or dark waters. So right there you have the god of the sacred tree as a sibling of the dark waters, emerging from the same source parent above them, with like 8 other brothers along with them. But these other brothers have names meaning like ember and nobility, or ember and noble, and like certain things that they sound like wood. One of them means wood, and the food, who I've mapped Ith, who means food, I've mapped that to the concept of virage. So there are these other divine principles floating around, but I think it's pretty obvious that when you have the god of the sacred tree, Bila, whose name very obviously refers to the sacred tree right there, as a sibling of the dark waters, of a figure whose name means dark waters, that is something you need to zero in on as a juxtaposition and a coded creation myth. And so if Bila is Prajapati, he should then have the same or similar offspring. And like I said, his grandson is Eivor Finn, and that goes back to the parallel between Finn and Odin. Yeah, is there anything that you guys think has been left unclear in some of the Celtic argument that I've given for that, or thoughts on how that works.
No, that seems to follow the same pattern, and there's still this, relation in some way, albeit kind of tenuous, to tree symbolism in this genealogy leading up to the tripartite Rudra who separates heaven and earth. I think it's a pretty consistent pattern that is pretty noticeable once you point it out. And I think it's clearest in terms of using this genealogy as the comparative method to deduce Prajapati is clearest in the Indic, Gaelic, and Germanic. I think that's most obvious in those three. But
Okay,
yeah, I think it's okay.
yeah, good. And then the other thing that, of course, is interesting is that then you get to the intermediary figure between Bila and Everfin, and his name, Galav, means ardor and overflowing, overflowing heat, which is an ardor. So it's like a boiling, like it is the boiling over of, it maps perfectly to what you would want to see in this intermediary step. And so that is a bit too uncanny. And then the thing to point out along with that is that there are these multiple layers of Celtic, of Irish mythology, which are the sort of mythological cycle of the gods, with the Battle of Moytura and those types of myths with Lu. And then there are the Book of Invasions with the Sons of Mil, which is what we've just been talking about with Bila. And that is sort of a euhemerized text, but it is also the most specific and clear preserved creation myth in this tradition. So you have to look at these different layers. But then there's also the Fenian cycle, which is the tales of Finn, which sometimes people think are just folk tales developed later or some sort of literary creation, but they're actually the stories of the god Finn, just in, lightly euhemerized folktale-ish form, but it doesn't change the content of what is being carried in that tradition. And then you also have the Ulster cycle of Cuchulainn, which is a more epic cycle style, but with this layer of light euhemerism, where underneath there is still a clear set of mythological figures and mythological material that has to be dealt with. But in each one of those traditions, there is likely to be, or there seems to be, I would say, a different figure who is the Prajapati type. So Bila is the name that we find in the Sons of Mil Book of Invasions tradition. But that name pops up as just the name of the sacred trees around Ireland, essentially. And so that connection of the god to the sacred trees is strong in that identification and in that tradition of sacred trees. But that doesn't mean that's the only name of the Irish Prajapati, is what I'm trying to say, because you have these other layers of mythical material. And what I found is that basically Conchobar from the Ulster cycle, Conchobar or Connor, is the Prajapati type in that tradition. And Tig, which I'm editing a video right now about Tig and Cool. Tig is the Prajapati type of the Fenian cycle. And I've also put out the theory that Crom Cruach could be the Prajapati type of other, just another name of the Prajapati type in sort of the folk tradition. There is less material even about Crom Cruach to even say that for sure, though, I think. But we do see this theme of, we see this description of Crom Cruach as the central, as a sort of central golden idol with 12, 12 idols around him. And it's sort of this image of, the number 12 is very strongly associated with totality of the year. And the year is another name for Prajapati, and things like this, where he is this center point and image of totality. It leads to the possibility of Crom Cruach being a Prajapati figure, unless the other thing that I've thought about is whether, he could be like a sun god. I also mentioned the sun god, but the sun symbolically overlays with Prajapati in some contexts, as with Atum Ra, that kind of idea. But also there's the possibility that there is the Rudra type god like Finn, as could be what is being recognized in the concept of Crom Cruach. We don't have enough information to really say for sure, I think. But yeah, that should be clarified. And I think one of the strongest cases for Conchovar being the Prajapati type, first of all, he's like this central king within the Ulster cycle. His centrality, kingship. He is, interestingly, he's like born on the same day as that Jesus Christ is born, or something like that. He is, his battle against Fergus Mac Roach, it maps to the story of the humbling of Indra, as I've argued in another video, where Indra is humbled by Prajapati, or the absolute god taking the form of Prajapati, of Brahma, or there's different variations where it could just be Shiva or Vishnu, who is doing the humbling. But there's sort of a consistent case, as you can look at the video on this topic to see these variations, but there's sort of consistency that it is the embodied absolute, usually associated with the Prajapati type, who is in this humbling role, and that maps to Fergus Mac Roach fighting Conchovar, and he can't break through his shield. Anyways, a bit more complicated argument there. Is there another branch that you guys would like to explore that we have on our chart?
I feel like it's time to look into the Hellenic protogonos.
Yes.
And so I would like to actually share the Orphic hymn with you. I don't know if my screen is being shared. If you're seeing my screen, hopefully so. Probably not, though. Okay, but at any rate, I'm just going to go quickly over a bit of the more interesting epithets that we find in this Orphic hymn, so that we can actually compare them to what has been said so far, especially about Prajapati, but also obviously about Buri and Beli and the others. So obviously the first word in the Orphic hymn is protogonon, or actually other editions have protogonon. Now it looks like a very insignificant difference, but actually it is very significant, because with this accentation that you see in the edition on my screen, this would be translatable as first ancestor. With the other accentation on the second to last vowel, you would actually translate it as firstborn. So it's kind of an issue of how we want to interpret this name, hoping that I'm not actually switching them up. But either way, there's this issue of interpretation. Then the name is obviously interesting because the two roots are the same ones that we find in praja. So proto is the word meaning first, and pro is from the same Indo-European root as Sanskrit pra, which usually also means before, but can have a bunch of other meanings in both Sanskrit and Greek. And then gon is the root meaning to beget or to be born, and it's the same root as Sanskrit ja, which once again has the same meaning. The Sanskrit is in another grade. If one studies Indo-European linguistics, there's an issue of grades, but the roots that form the name are clearly the same. And it's probably not coincidence. I think it's definitely a good indication of what we're dealing with. With Buri, we have a different root with a similar meaning, or more or less the same meaning. So it's also interesting to look at that. Obviously, languages sometimes shift their form, but still kind of retain the essence of the meaning, the semantics in the new root. Dipue means having two natures. This can be interpreted in many ways. I see many translators interpret it as having two sexes, so being both male and female at the same time. And so ultimately referring to totality, the totality of the universe. One could make an argument for non-duality as well. So that's interesting. It's also interesting that the Roman parallel that we'll deal with next, Janus, also is associated with duality, having two faces, right? So it's something that could be very ancient here. Heteroplankton means going throughout the ether, and ether should be interpreted as fire. We probably don't see any difference between fire and ether in earlier poets. This text is not too early. It's probably from Hellenistic times. So it could mean a quintessence distinct from fire, or it could mean fire. It's something that could be not too relevant here, but if one wants to dive into it, they're welcome to do so. Then we have a very interesting epithet comparison-wise, oogene, which means born from the egg. Gen is clearly the same root as gon, so always the root meaning to beget or to be born. And the first part of the compound is the Greek word meaning egg. So it's a reference to the myth of Protogonos being born from this egg, which is a clear parallel to Prajapati being born from the egg. And once again, the name Hiranyagarbha, so the golden egg, it's something closely related. And then we see another interesting thing. We see the word for gold pop up, but the whole sentence here means rejoicing in his golden wings. So he is associated with gold, and this is relevant comparing to Hiranyagarbha and whatever. But also he's a winged creature, and this is going to come up a lot throughout the hymn. Tauroboan means having the shouting voice of a bull. And then he's said to be Genesin makaron treton tan tropon. So he is the origin, again, the root gen meaning to beget. So he's the origin, the source, the seed, if you will, if we're going for the seed kind of explanation of the blessed. Makares are obviously the gods, but also of mortal men. This is not a surprise in Greek mythology. There are a bunch of genealogies, but usually human beings are descended from Prometheus, who is himself descended from some sort of deity, many different versions. The most popular one has Iapetus, but there are also other ones. But the interesting thing is that obviously Protogonos is this sort of universal forefather, which could fit well with Buri, kind of the idea of universal forefather. Again, another interesting word. This word in English would sound kind of obscene, but sperma is just Greek meaning seed. So again, the idea of the seed that we have mentioned earlier. Then there's this other name, Erikepaion, that has not been properly explained so far, so I'm not going to risk it. But it has been associated with the idea of strength in some commentaries, so that could be interesting to some degree. Obviously, this is interesting. The god is defined as arreton, which means unspeakable. Obviously, we do not see any source mentioning Protogonos explicitly up until the Orphic hymns pop up, or other Orphic documents that I read. So he was clearly exclusively a deity for mysteric worship. He was not really a deity to be talked about openly outside of mysteries, and he's not mentioned by Hesiod, not mentioned by Homer. So this is something that we do not really have an explanation for, or at least I don't have one. It's possibly also related to him being so universal and possibly so profound as a thing that it was probably hard to discuss it outside of the mysteric framework. Another very interesting thing that I see in this hymn is that he said to chase away the darkness from the shadowy mist. Skotoesan means shadowy, so related to the root meaning shadow or darkness. And omikle is usually a cloud or some sort of mist. It's possible that this mist is analogous to the Vedic waters. It could have something to do with that. Obviously, we're talking about different forms of water in different branches of the tradition. So we have seen ice among the Germanics and so on. Again, the wings come up, but it's not too relevant. Then we have a line basically about his association with light. So one of the names of this deity is Panes, which is obviously related to the verb paino, which means I show or I shed light on something. But obviously this also sounds similar to the word paos, which means light. And so we actually see the pan being played out. Then we have an identification with Priapus. I'm not sure on the English pronunciation. Priapon in this version of the hymn in Ionic dialect, who is the deity that you will all remember for his male genitalia. So again, a symbol of generation, of begetting. So it all ties perfectly into this picture of a progenitor, of this sort of ancestor of all of living life, of gods and humans and whatnot. And again, lines up pretty nicely, especially with the Vedic, but also with all the other branches in which we have the images of generations, of seed, of again the egg. So everything kind of lines up with this Orphic hymn. It's kind of bad. I'm sort of saddened, if anything, that we don't have more sources dealing with these deity. And especially no ancient sources that like maybe compare him to Janus, which is what I'm going to do next. But before that, if anyone has anything to add on top of this character of this deity or anything else that could be relevant for our comparisons, you're welcome to do so.
Well, real quick, there were some people asking questions in the live chat. I wanted to address some of those before we moved on, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I don't even have that. I don't even know how to open that yet, so I gotta find
That's fine. I got it on my phone. There are some people just saying great show and everything. Thank you for those guys. I'm just gonna skip to the questions. Someone was asking about Twisco or Twisto being a variant of Buri while we were talking about Buri. And
that is what I think is most likely somehow, but it's one of those things where there's just so little information to verify what any theory might be, because yeah, what were you going to say about it?
Well, he goes on to say basically, as far as we've developed our thoughts on it, his name, James Fields in the chat, his name closely resembles Tvaster or Tvashtar, I don't know how to pronounce it, and he is said to be earth-born, perhaps being born of the sky-earth eggshell. Well, this is about as far. I mean,
that's about what I said too. Although I think the actual etymology, connecting the possibility of connecting Twisco to Tvashtar was sort of much less likely than. Yeah, I think that connection is incorrect. And Josephus could probably remember when we discussed this before. What's happening? Did I turn on music there? That's fine. Okay. But nonetheless, I would keep that as an open possibility. There's also, with the issue of Tig, is very interesting because I'll show in my next coming up video that Tig is very definitely, I think, in the Prajapati role in the Fenian cycle in his myth. And the name Tig comes from a root that is taskos, like Taskos in Proto-Celtic, and it means badger. However, the word for badger was replaced in Irish language, I think in the Middle Ages, with a word brocco, Brokko. And so that is interesting because there is the dwarven smith called Brokkr, Brokkr, and that has traditionally, at least in some, I found 3 different sources from the mid 20th century and the late 19th century, connecting Brokkr potentially to this root, the same root as Brocco. It's a possibility, but some recent scholars like Rudolf Simic say that the etymology is uncertain for Brokkr, and that other possibilities have been offered relating to a gate, or relating to either a gate, like a stride, a gate, or relating to breaking up fragments like a smith does. And so it would mean the one who breaks up fragments, like it would essentially mean like a smith. It would not be related to Brocco. The point is also that, Taskos was also connected traditionally to a root word going back to Proto-Indo-European that would be a synonym of Tvashtar. It's these very tenuous connections, but Tvashtar is, of course, the smith as well. So this is the theme that I'm pointing to. You can go by these. You can go into these investigations, which I've been trying to follow, but found no solid link. But then you come around to Twisco. Twisco is then once again this closely sounding name to Taskos. Like how coincidental is that? So my sort of question is, was there sort of a phonetic consistency with some slightly different words that developed in these different ways? I don't know. Just sort of sometimes there's some phonetic magic that goes on with how gods are named and renamed, how they develop in different ways. The poets play with name sounds sometimes, like the Irish thunder god is Turin, but thunder itself is Toran, and it's not quite the same word, but we can tell Turin is very much likely to just be a changed name from Toran and the Welsh Terran and Terranus of the continent. So yeah, it's this sort of question of whether Twisco can it, even if it's not quite the same etymology, is there some phonetic connection there? And then there are other possibilities with Twisco. I think it can mean, even if it means like has is connected to a concept of double or rather twinning. It has been connected to these other concepts, which people have tried to connect to Ymir, reasonably so. But you could be very easily tricked by a word meaning that could have a different application to a Prajapati type god. It's just that simple. Like Prajapati himself is hermaphroditic because he has the female aspect within himself, like I described. So it's emphasized in the Vedic tradition that he is one of the hermaphroditic gods. And yeah, so what do you have to say to that, Josephus? Any etymological connections that you found interesting?
Yeah,
Everything that we've investigated a lot of these connections, and they're all like very hard to solidify anything. That's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues with Twisco or Twisto is that it's also only recorded in languages other than Germanic languages. So manuscripts sometimes mess up the transcription. The etymology
Exactly.
connecting it to the root for two or twinning or twisting or all these kind of two related words is probably the most sound one, which is kind of a shame because twashtr probably has another etymology. That being said, even if the number two is probably etymologically from the same root as tuisco, we would have to figure out how the connection is made. Obviously, something like having a hermaphroditic deity or a deity with two natures, as we have discussed in the Orphic hymn, or with two faces, such as Janus, as we will discuss soon, is probably a good match. But we would probably have a good match, but we would have to probably know more about Tuisco than the sources allow us to do. I would also like to answer to a commenter, Moba Menes, who says that Praja means people. So I actually got the Sanskrit dictionary here, so you can look the word up. And the primary meaning is procreation, propagation, birth. People is also a meaning. So it's not wrong to say that Prajapati can mean the Lord of people. It's just that the earlier meaning attested in the Vedas is procreation, and this meaning also very nicely
Bearing is what
lines up.
It's fascinating that bearing is one of the first ones listed up at the top. Bearing because Buri is the one who would bear. So that's I haven't looked at this entry before to see that, but
the issue is that the word for bearing is another is basically with another ablot grade. It's kind of a secondary thing. It's clearly the same root. So yeah, we have obviously the same theme of bearing, begetting, procreating, which lines up so nicely with all the other deities that we are discussing today. So clearly, the meaning of Lord of People is not really wrong, but it's kind of probably less relevant to the understanding of these deities.
Yes, and it's definitely not the traditional way that it's understood in Vedic tradition, and it's much more an emphasis on the Lord of generation, Lord of offspring, essentially.
Yeah, especially this bringing forth right before the bearing. So I forget which dictionary. There's one dictionary that translates buri and bur as bringer forth and brought forth, respectively. And then buri having the same root, I'm pretty sure, as the word bear in terms of, that's pretty interesting. I haven't seen Praja translated that way.
Yeah, me neither. So that's, I haven't looked at this. So that's really fascinating to see. But this ties nicely. Let me just really quickly note that, so the intermediary step between Prajapati and Rudra is either just like his seed or the seed of his sons, who are extensions of himself, his four primordial sons. But also in another variant, a prominent variant, the intermediary step is Manu, is a figure called Manu, which is the god of essentially fury or wrath. And in the hymn to, let's see, it is the hymn to Manu, I believe, in the Atharva Veda. It's either the hymn to Kama or the hymn to Manu. I think it's the hymn to Manu. Manu is addressed as Kama and Manu back to back. So he is essentially, so Kama is the passion of the father, which is identified with the seed or semen of Prajapati. And in the hymn, and then in the variant, it is actually, it's Manu instead who's in that position, god of wrath. And in the hymn to Manu, Kama and Manu are identified with each other. So it's this concept where I usually refer to as Kama / Manu. So Kama / Manu is, you can summarize this intermediary step between Prajapati and Rudra, because there are different variants in the Vedic tradition where it's one or the other, and then in the very the main hymn, the only hymn to Manu, I believe, in the Vedas, he is directly identified. They are directly identified with each other. So there are different essentially they are different degrees of the overflowing creative passion or heat. So this creative overflow of the Father, which can be imaged as the seed, it's like the overflow of passion, aka overflow of wrath also. So it's like this furious creative heat that overflows from him. So then that has to be, in my opinion, what Bor is. He's one or the other of these. In the Irish tradition, Gaulav, aka Mil España, is in that position as son of Bila, and Gaulav essentially has the same etymology as Manu, somewhere in between, but it seems potentially closer to Manu because it is it's like a warrior ardor. So that's kind of approximating like wrathful fury. So yeah, essentially the etymology of Gaulav is ardor, overflowing heat, like is also one of like the secondary meanings. And then this ties back, so that meaning of Manu, that aspect of Manu, goes back to the Twisco question, because son of Twisco happens to be Manus, and so I've suggested that could be, it would match up just a bit too coincidentally to have Manus as the father of Irmun, and Irmun is another name of Odin, just as Bor is the father of Odin. So it's a big question mark, but you have Manus right there. And the other thing significant that the commenter brought up was really key, is that Twisco is said to be earthborn. And I think that causes a huge problem for Twisco being Ymir. It doesn't make any sense to me how you can map that. You have to postulate that things have changed radically in a way that just has no basis to really argue for it, that Ymir would be earthborn. Unless the only concept would be Twisco being earthborn is after Sky is split from Earth. It's like Sky being, the head of Ymir, splitting from his body. That is the Sky being born from the Earth, like Uranus is born from Gaia. That is true. So that would be the one way to make Twisco map to Ymir better. And then in the Shatapatha Brahmana creation myth, where Prajapati is born in the earthen shell, he is specifically and explicitly said to be born from the earth goddess out of this earthen eggshell. So that is Shatapatha Brahmana 6.1.1, and it is very much Prithvi, the goddess, who gives birth to Agni Prajapati in the conclusion of that myth. So that very much makes a Vedic tradition where Prajapati is born of earth specifically and directly. So there are different ways, and if you want to say that Twisco is Ymir and that he's born from earth because Sky is born from earth in, for example, Greek tradition, and by the splitting, you can conceptualize it that way, then Manus would have to, I don't think it makes any sense to say it's Manu. Well, okay, you can make whatever theory you want, but Manus could be the sort of archetype of mankind. So this could be, it could be like Manu as the archetype of mankind, and this is showing a genealogy from out of either Ymir or Buri, who knows, whatever you want Twisco to be. And then Manus could just be not related to Buri and Bor. Manus could potentially be just like the first man in some sense. That could have been what that story was about. And then from there, Irmun and his two brothers that are the progenitors of the tribes, those could be human tribes that happen to have these names, and it could not be a god myth at that level at all. So that would be one way that it would, we don't have enough information to pinpoint those types of questions. So it's why it's quite frustrating. But I do like the possibility that Twisco could be Prajapati, but I'm open to him being Ymir, and I still don't think that it wouldn't connect to the Yimo and Manus myth even at that level, in my opinion. Even if you wanted to make that argument, you would just have Ymir and then the primordial archetype of mankind, such as Manu as his son, which isn't attested in Vedic tradition either. But did you want to continue, Josephus, with your other material?
Yeah, I think it's time to bring up the Latin comparison with Janus. So Janus is a very, or Janus with the English pronunciation, I guess, is a really important deity in Roman religion. He's actually the first deity that has to be invoked in any given ritual. There are basically no exceptions to this rule. So he's always invoked first, and his name is usually explained as coming from the root that means to go. And this makes sense as he's, among the many things, a god of doorways, of passages. Obviously, the doors of our houses are included, but there are also some specific door-like structures, such as the Tigillum Sororium, which is basically some sort of arc that soldiers would go through before re-entering the city after the war season. So obviously these had the ability to purify them from the bloodshed of the battlefield. So probably everyone knows about Janus having two heads, or rather two faces. Sometimes they look the same. Sometimes one is the face of an old man and the other is the face of a young man. Very few people remember that there's also another variant of Janus who is depicted with four faces looking towards the four compass points, right? This actually lines up pretty well with depictions of Prajapati, who is usually depicted with four heads, sometimes also a fifth head, which is cut off by Rudra. This is obviously not found in Roman mythology, but still the forehead comparison is pretty strong, and obviously the foreheads can be associated with all sorts of quadruplicities, right? So with the four seasons, the four stages of human life, obviously these are kind of categorizations that we humans kind of come up with, but they made a lot of sense in antiquity and they were pretty ubiquitous. We also have the four humors in the medical tradition. The medical tradition was heavily tied to religious and alchemical conceptions in antiquity and beyond. And so I would have a look at what Ovid, the poet, has to say about Janus. And actually, he, as a poetic device, has Janus himself talk about this. So the question that the poet asks Janus is why the god has two faces. This is so unusual. We are so used to Roman deities having either the shape of a human being in depictions. Obviously, these depictions are not really meant to capture the real appearance of a deity. They are meant to make the deity understandable to their worshippers, to humans like us. But usually they have the depiction of an actual human. Sometimes we have more aniconic depictions, so we may have a stone representing Jupiter. But why is Janus depicted as a human with two heads? And the explanation that is provided is that Janus is actually the same as Chaos. So here he says, the ancient man called me Chaos, namsum res priisca. I am the first thing. Res priisca is like the first element, the first matter. It's very similar to the prima materia of the alchemists, if you will. And so we are casting Janus as this sort of primordial deity, which is somehow the origin of everything else, basically. So he then goes on to describe how this unity of chaos, was split up into the various elements. And a really interesting thing is how he explains this, because he starts by saying, he starts by talking about air. Lucidus aer obviously means air, which is carrying light. Lucidus from the root of the verb lucere, to be luminous, to shed light. Air and the three remaining elements. Obviously, corporal literally means bodies, but here it refers to elements. So air has a very important position in this creation myth, in this retelling by Ovid of the of Janus as a sort of original deity. And airs are also pretty crucial in the Vedic creation myth. I wouldn't necessarily go too much into details. We also have gone past the hour, but still, the idea lines pretty nicely up with the Vedic material that we have. So basically, all the air's elements are divided and kind of organize themselves in such a way that fire takes the highest place, and then obviously the air is placed around close to the fire, basically, so forms the atmosphere, and then obviously the earth and the water are in the lowest position. And then what remains of this original matter forms the shape of the deity. So membra here is obviously referring to the body, although it's kind of a poetic image. We cannot assume that a deity has a literal body. Now, this creation myth that is described here by Ovid, very shortly actually, is probably to be compared with another work by Ovid, the Metamorphoses, which begin with a creation myth. So here we're looking, well, also, by the way, I didn't mention this, but the passages that we have dealt with are from the first book of the Fasti, so a poem about a calendar. And the passage that we're going to look at is from the first book of the Metamorphoses. So there's a thing with beginning by starting to talk about creation. And obviously, Janus is the deity of beginnings in general, and the first deity invoked in sacrifices. So the poet Ovid probably thought about this. He probably thought about studying his poems by mentioning and honoring this deity as the beginning of everything, basically. So in the Metamorphosis version, the name of Janus does not come up. The only thing that kind of reminds us of Janus is this Deus et melior natura, which means God and better nature. Obviously, Latin does not have articles, so should we understand the God or a God? It's kind of a pointless question. It's a moot point here. But obviously, I'm pretty positive that this Deus here, this deity, is supposed to be Janus. There's just no other explanation that would make sense. Melior natura obviously refers to a divine nature, so a nature which is perfect, which is all-knowing, which is loving, which is obviously better than the human nature that we are used to seeing. So again, we have kind of the same situation that we have in the Fasti, so a description of various elements being divided and being rearranged into their places. Once again, the airs are pretty relevant. Here we get to the passages about air, especially because obviously we have a description of the various winds. So we have Eurus, as you can see here, that goes towards the east. Obviously, we have Zephyr going towards the west, Auster, which is the south wind, and somewhere here we should have the north wind as well. So the four winds, the four compass points, which brings us back to the image of Janus quadrifrons, Janus with the four faces. And so probably Ovid had this image in mind. I like to think that he did. And once again, this is a further argument to reinforce the idea that the Metamorphosis creation myth is still very much Janus coded. and especially here we have it, the air is particularly important in this myth because it contains tonithroa, so the thunderbolts, which are able motura, able to move human minds. So this is the only element which is said to have anything to do with human minds, right? You can obviously check the whole passage here, but basically humans are not mentioned yet. They will be mentioned later after the elements are organized. But the idea that somehow thunderbolts have an impression on humans makes these elements of air being kind of standing out. There is also an epithet of Janus, which is Janus Junonius. So Janus related to the goddess Juno. Juno is also a goddess of air. So once again, there's this aspect that pops up once again. So yeah, basically that's what Ovid has to say. Other authors don't always delve deep into Janus. An author that does is Macrobius, who tries to explain Janus in Hellenic terms, because that's what most ancient Latin authors usually did. They looked at Greece as a source of their culture, and especially high-end culture. And his attempt is to identify Janus with Apollo. I can see some reasons why. Obviously, Macrobius does provide arguments, but ultimately, it doesn't really make sense. Apollo is one of the younger deities. Janus, on the contrary, as we have ascertained from these Ovid passages, is one of the earliest deities. He's the god of the earliest things. In some more euhemeristic renditions, Janus is said to be the first king of Italy and to have ruled over ancient Latium, so the Lazio region of Italy, to have reigned over there before Saturn came to Latium. So obviously we're talking about as old as Roman mythology can possibly go, basically. We're looking so far back. I'm not specifically reading from text here, but I mean, it's you can look up the Origo Gentis Romanae for a very short summary, again with some euhemeristic traits. But there are a bunch of texts that deal with that. So Janus as this sort of primordial deity, once again, lines up pretty nicely with Prajapati, Protogonos, Puri, and all the others. It's kind of sad not to see a Rudra or Odin homologue as the son or grandson of Janus, unless actually we do, but not as a paternal grandson as we would expect, but as a maternal grandson. So the daughter of Janus is named Canens, the goddess of singing, as her name suggests. Canere is Latin for to sing. And she is the mother of Faunus, or in Latin Faunus, who is a possible, it's a complicated matter, but he's a possible Rudra and Odin homologue, and this has been discussed already in academic papers, so it's not just our speculation. And so once again, we find something interesting, this kind of genealogy in which the first begetter deity, so Buri or Prajapati, is the grandfather of the of these kind of Rudra, Odin, Faunus kind of deity. In Greek mythology, obviously, we didn't mention it. It's probably obvious, but I wouldn't want to assume that it's obvious to everyone. Protogonos is the grandfather of Kronos. So the grandfather role checks out. The real issue is how is Protogonos the grandfather of Kronos? He is the grandfather of Kronos through Uranos, so through the sky deity, who is the son of Protogonos and the father of Kronos. This
right, and that's a difference.
Well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a difference. That's what I'm saying. This does not line up with the other versions, because Buri is the father of Bur, who is clearly distinct from Ymir. We do not have Dyaush as the father of Rudra in Vedic material. So this could obviously open a bunch of questions and answers. I would say the easiest explanation here is that the Greek version has been a bit influenced by Middle Eastern versions. Obviously, in Sumerian mythology, Enlil is the son of An, so this kind of carried over to Akkadians, Hittites, and all these things. So obviously, once again, we have part of a similarity and part of a difference. It's important to look at both. Obviously, try to explain differences when we can find a difference. Because obviously, myths are not too static. Like obviously, they tend to be very well preserved because there's a tradition, a religious tradition around mythology. But obviously, it's not impossible for them to be altered in ways that we can philologically get to.
Yeah, and that like so you said, it opens up a problem, or it opens up a whole important issue, which is the influence of the kingship cycle, specifically of Uranos to Cronus to Zeus, the influence on Hesiod, the Hesiodic tradition specifically, and on all of Greek tradition from the Hittite, Sumerian, sort of Near East traditions that seem convincingly, in my opinion, to have influenced some kind of change in the order there, which that could be the explanation that helps to understand why you have the sky there in between Protagoras and Cronus, where in other IE traditions you would expect comma/manu type.
Yeah, also this kind of karma type does appear in Greek mythology as Eros, so as the
he's right up in the mix there.
Yeah, sometimes identified with Protogonos, sometimes distinct, sometimes identified. So it's also kind of something in the air once again. Okay, some commentary saying that Sumerian is Middle East. Yeah, it's Middle East. Obviously, Greeks and Sumerians had no direct contact, but Sumerians influenced Akkadian-speaking peoples, who influenced Hittites, who ultimately influenced Hesiod. So that's a whole can of worms. We just kind of brought it out quickly.
Yeah, it's a can of worms, a very important one though, and I really think that needs to be taken. It's a legitimately established scholarly position as well, that influence.
So I don't know if anything else needs to be
one
said.
Question for you. What is your? I'm gonna put up something else here. So this is the hymn to Prana. So what are your thoughts about Janus relative to Prana, chaos? So chaos is essentially Prana in my interpretation that I've put out there, at least. You have in the hymn to Prana that he is identified also Prajapati. So they are distinct but identified within the hymn. So that's interesting. Right there.
Yeah, this is a very...
Prana is called Prajapati. So right there you can see. And Prana, aka chaos, is what I'm saying, because chaos is the primordial air, primordial respiration, even. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that issue? And do you think there's a strong connection to the chaos, to the air with Janus as well, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that having this Vedic parallel further solidifies kind of the Roman religion as being conservative, essentially. Janus in Roman religion is obviously a Prajapati reflex, but he's also closely related to the air, to the point that he may look like a Vayu analog in some respects, but we also have other Vayu analogs, so it's kind of, we're opening new cans of worms anytime. But so, obviously having Vedic confirmation kind of solidifies that Janus, being related to air, is not a Roman innovation, is not a random speculation on the part of relatively recent Romans, but is actually a conservative trait So the idea that this Prajapati deity is somehow associated with the air, and this air are usually the first element in creation in one way or another, and obviously Prajapati as the begetter of everyone else, of every other deity and mortal, at least as Protogonos, you also said to be, is also even identified with Prana. Obviously, Vedic hymns are full of identifications, so it's not always easy
Exactly.
to weigh, to give them a specific weight, essentially.
Yes, the weight.
But in this case, once again, if both the Vedic hymns and Roman mythology agree on something, it's a good argument to
There,
kind of say that the Vedic equivalence matters here.
there are repeated other identifications of Prajapati with Vayu, the wind, and things like that. But of course, Prajapati as the totality symbol, he is also identified with Agni. He is also identified with Soma. So these identifications get to be, like you said, it's hard to weight them sometimes, because he is kind of all of the primordial things, the gods, overlaid in a sense. They are his faces because he's the totality. Even Rudra or Rudra Agni is like the burning, the sort of essence of the fire within him and within his mind of Prajapati. And so that's another important thing about Prajapati in general, is there's kind of this primordial polarity between Prajapati and Rudra. But like I just said, they're also kind of within the unity of the godhead. They are like, before any division of the material or visible world, they are somehow intertwined in this way that is hard for human minds to understand. But as divine principles at the highest level, they are like a polarity where Prajapati is the one who generates, who emits the seed, which is the divine liquid of the absolute. And in that sense, he's sort of profligate and wasteful from the perspective of Rudra. Rudra is like the policing god of the primordial unity, and he wants to draw things back to the perfection of the unity. And so he is the one who is the antagonist of Prajapati, the one who is spending the procreative fluid into the world. And so there is a dynamic where Rudra is the attacker of Prajapati in his most primordial myth. So that is a theme that my upcoming video is heavily about. But that's a really important thing to understand about Prajapati. He turns into a deer and is hunted by Rudra the hunter, and when he copulates with his daughter in deer or antelope form. And so because he is the one who turns into the deer on this highest level, that is what my Krnunos video goes into as well, that Krnunos must be of the Prajapati type. Krnunos is either this highest Prajapati as the deer god, the one who is hunted by the hunter god. That's this polarity, this dynamic that I just described. The deer itself is the symbol of like the outflowing generative energy of nature or of the cosmos, and the Rudra type is the one who aims at that to try to either punish that outflow, mythically speaking, or to stop it from happening. To sort of, that's why Rudra Shiva is this meditating god, drawing things back to unity, overcoming the passions, so to speak. Anyways, that goes back to the Krnunos video. I just wanted to point out that Krnunos also could be a Prajapati type, but specifically in my Krnunos video, I describe how Daksha Prajapati, who is like a next step down manifestation of Prajapati as the primordial sacrificer. So Prajapati is this primordial sacrificer too. So that's interesting and important, because he overcomes death by inventing the rites. These are important things to note in this Prajapati video. I think he overcomes death. He comes up with all the rites. This is why Abraham, as I touched on, is a Prajapati type. has Prajapati type themes in there in his mythos. But then in the actual Kununos figures we have, they seem to specifically refer back to Daksha Prajapati type myths. So as I showed in my video, so Kununos can be thrown in the mix in this, but he is more related to the Daksha type, sort of this focusing of the archetypal sacrificer role of Prajapati into an emanation of Prajapati, who is also takes a horned god form. So the horns also relate to that sacrificer role. Okay, Arno, would you like to touch on anything about Slavic before we finish up here? Ahura Mazda, I guess I'll touch on this in my upcoming video too. He specifically marries his daughter, who is Earth, and then and he's the creator god. I think there's this big problem that the Prajapati element identity of Ahura Mazda has been really missed by a lot of scholars who focus on Varuna as his like main identity, but he literally sets the archetype of the sacred incestuous marriage of the like creator god and the daughter in his mythos, which is Spandarmad, and I'll touch on that in my upcoming video. That can be gone into more. But would you like to do the Slavic stuff?
Yeah, we had in the Patreon chat, a patron named Jay brought a quote from Life of Saint Otto about Triglav that sounded pretty Prajapati coded. Stettin, a big city larger than Volin, had 3 hills in his jurisdiction. The middle one of these, which was also the highest, was dedicated to Triglav, which means 3-headed, the most important god of the pagans. Its statue had 3 heads, and its eyes and lips were covered with a golden bandage. About the idols, the priests said that their most important god had 3 heads, and it ruled the 3 kingdoms, namely heaven, earth, and hell. And its face was covered with a bandage so that it might ignore the sins of men as it did not see them and was silent. So it's not conclusive, but you have this golden imagery associated with this totality deity represented by 3 in terms of ruling and overseeing the 3 realms, heaven, earth, and hell, and then also being the most prominent and highest god, whose idol was situated on a hill. That is really about it.
That hill imagery, it can't be overstated, really. The hill imagery is strong in this god type. It could, it's also not conclusive. Like you said, a hill could be identified with a different god, but it is important.
Yeah, that's essentially about it. There is, I believe, from Helmold's Chronicle. I don't have these quotes pulled up. I'm reading them from a DM from someone who sent them to me real quick.
Right. And Slavic material. It's tough to confirm this, but I did think it was. You had this commenter had some interesting points to bring up in that respect.
Yeah, it's clear that from Helmold's Chronicle, it doesn't mention Triglav, but mentions that the Slavs had a god that all the other gods obey. There's like the highest god. That's not necessarily a Prajapati type, but it is this a lot of polytheism and paganism. When people learn about it in modern times, it's pretty clear to see that there's like a king of the gods, but this sort of Prajapati totality godhead being the origin of all gods is not an aspect of theology that people really know about very much. And,
right. Yeah. And it's important to touch on this duality of Rudra, the Rudra type and the Prajapati type as well, because Odin is the all-father, or whatever that epithet means, but he is the dominant king of the gods for sure in Norse tradition. So a lot of times people don't want to focus on what is this Buri figure that's his grandfather. He probably doesn't matter. Clearly Odin is the father of the Aesir that matters. We don't have very much mythology about Buri. So what even is he? He's just there as a ancestor figure or whatever, right? This is the attitude because people don't know what to do with him or why he would be important. But he is this grandfather, so to speak, of the gods, the source. But if you understand in the parallels this esoteric level, before the division, before this outburst of creative the sacred liquid, before the Prajapati type has offspring, there is sort of this state of unbrokenness, the pre-cosmic state. Arguably, this is reflecting on the Vedic tradition. The cosmic egg is a symbol of unity before it breaks. That's what I'm trying to say. Inside of that egg is inside of that Buri, let's say, actually, let's focus on the Norse tradition. Inside of that Buri is the unborn Odin, is what I'm trying to say. So he is there as this sort of driving fury, you could say, divine fury within Buri, that is triggering, that is causing him to have this progenitive outburst, which leads to creation. So I think just because something isn't narrated in the myths, I know people don't like that, but this is the theory based on the parallels. Even though Buri is he's not seemingly as important, yet he is like the grandfather of the gods. I think there is a lot of comparative evidence to suggest that Odin is there, sort of driving the process from within. Because that is the dynamic with Rudra and Prajapati. Rudra Agni, that is to say, Rudra, this sort of fury within the fire, is inside of Prajapati, causing him to act. And Prajapati, as the totality and the progenitor, he's sort of reactive to. He's sort of a more. You can see pretty clearly in the tradition that Prajapati / Brahma is not the most important god, even though he is this godhead figure. He's part of the godhead, but Rudra and Vishnu take a higher position than him, and this is because he is sort of this passive or reactive god. He's reacting to the sort of driving force of the fury that's within him, the burning passion of the sort of Rudra Agni that's causing. And anyways, my next video, I promise, will go into this extremely thoroughly. How Rudra Agni is the fire within the Prajapati that causes him to burst out with the creation, with the emission of the primal seed, and all of that is really secretively or esoterically driven by the Rudra type. And so that's how you can picture, at least, Odin being there as actually secretively behind the scenes, the higher god, even than Buri, who's his own grandfather. A lot of paradoxes there, but you can kind of meditate on that.
Well, so you were describing Prajapati as this, like, he's a higher godhead, and he's not the most important god despite that position, and that reminded me of this concept of Deus Otiosus. And I was, being a Latin phrase, I wanted to ask Josephus if that was an appropriate title to attribute this god type with. Deus Otiosus meaning like an inactive god.
Yeah, it's similar, at least. He definitely recedes. Okay, like after Prajapati gives rise to Rudra, Rudra comes back to him and points his arrow at him and demands from him his titles, which are the titles of all existence. So he basically takes over Rudra, who gets born out of Prajapati's creation, triggered by the higher sort of Rudra principle, gives birth to himself as Rudra in the world. That Rudra then goes and holds up Prajapati and says, "Give me all the names, the dominions." And after that, Rudra is essentially king of the world, having the titles of Bhava, which is all existence, and Mahadeva, the great god, and all these titles that indicate that he has kind of taken over for Prajapati. Prajapati then becomes, more, he kind of recedes into the background. He's had sort of the lordship of the world. He sort of passes it on, but he's there in the background too, as the symbolic totality and also the god of procreation. So anytime there's procreation, he's also, the archetypal sacrificer. So there's all these things. He is important. I don't want to say he isn't, but just because, it sort of explains this paradox of why Buri is more primordial than Odin, yet we kind of get the sense that Odin is much, much more important in the tradition itself. And then whether or not that godhead, that sort of totality figure of Prajapati or Buri, receives worship at all is like another question. Along with that, it seems like it's very possible he wouldn't receive direct worship in some cases, but in other cases there is evidence of that type of god receiving worship or esoteric treatment, as Josephus said with Protagonos, he becomes more of an esoteric god behind the scenes and all that. So, but anyways, is there any last words? I have to get going now, but I think we've covered a lot of the territory that I wanted to.
We have covered pretty much everything. Just a very quick note on the issue of Prajapati and Rudra in Roman mythology. There's not much, so that we're not going to take a long time about that. But we do see Janus basically associating Saturn in kingship with him. So this could have something to do with Rudra reclaiming the titles from Prajapati. It's just that the Romans made it more peaceful, as if Janus willingly associated Saturn to himself. Right. Obviously, the outer shape of the myth can change, but kind of the underlying meanings are not too different, I would contend. And also, they are the founders of two villages or proto-cities. Janus founds one named Janiculum, and Saturn founds one by the name of Saturnia. So the names are pretty self-explanatory. And they are pretty much on the side that will become Rome eventually. Rome obviously is a microcosm, but usually in Roman mythology you can find Rome, where maybe in Vedic mythology you find the whole world, so a macrocosm.
Yeah.
So that could be an interesting point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And Saturn, of course, being Rudra. The last thing I wanted to answer Nero's question about why Ymir would be first. So that is something I dwelt upon at length, and I made a whole video on that. So if you look through my videos, I made a whole video. Why is Ymir born first then, and Buri is born second? That's weird. And you see when you look at there's multiple versions of the cosmic egg, the golden embryo, emerging, being created in the Vedic tradition. And I looked at those, and repeatedly there is the shell is created first of the egg. It emerges. As it's emerging, it is covered with a shell, or the whole shell is created first, and then it just breaks. Then it's put in the water. Things like that. But for example, Shatapatha Brahmana 6.1.1, which I've referred to, Purusha, who makes the egg. Purusha, it's a whole nother question that we've touched on, but he is prior to all of this. And Purusha makes the egg first, and it is identified with earthen material, is identified with the earth goddess. And then from that, Agni Prajapati is born. So coming out after. So I think the concept, it's not, the connection is not made clear in Norse tradition, but it is consistent with the order that you see it, even in Vedic tradition, that the shell has to be formed first. It's kind of like the material parameters. Ymir is the material shell of the cosmos that kind of has to be put in place first for Buri to then emerge out of the water as the completed totality, I think. So it's this symbolic ordering rather than having a clear narrative connection between them. But I think it's a difficult thing to narrate when you want to make them two different figures. But yes, Ymir being sky earth, he is symbolically the what would be equal to the shell, and that is the material dimensions of the cosmos that are being created. And then Buri emerges as the embryo, the golden embryo, that is the divinity within, emerging out as sort of the completed totality, symbolically as the axis mundi, out of that what has been created as the material shell. So they kind of coincide in a confusing way, but one coming after the other makes sense when you look at the Vedic tradition, where the material shell is created first. So I got to go now, and thank you guys for coming. Thanks everyone for watching as we're kind of experimenting with this, and I think that was a lot of fun. So all right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for talking.
See you,
all right, bye.